Alright, quick video about Stella by Starlight, and I'll try not to cough too much because I've got a horrendous cough at the moment. Speaking of which, this channel is now sponsored by Lemsip. Okay, right. So this is kind of one of my Let the Tune Be Your Teacher videos. The last one was Green Dolphin Street, and I hope to do a few more. This tune is of course a jam session staple, it gets called a lot. My aim is not really to tell you how to play through it, I'll give you a few pointers, but really to talk about the composition itself, a few notable things about the tune, try and take you through the whole progression and give you an idea of what's going on, and hopefully improve your own knowledge of it if you're not really aware of this stuff already. A few basic preliminaries. This song is not a Broadway standard or a jazz composition, it actually comes from a Hollywood movie called The Uninvited, which is apparently a really good film. It's one of Stanley Kubrick's favourites. So the tune is like, I can't remember the exact term, there's diegetic or non-diegetic music. Somebody can post the answer below. But it's basically both music that is part of the action, so the characters actually played the song, and it's also part of the score as well. And I think that was quite common in that era of Hollywood, the sort of 1940s. Like a famous example would be Casablanca with As Time Goes By, for instance. And it seemed to be a trope that people used. The song was composed by Victor Young, who's also, I think, known as a Broadway composer as well, or at least he wrote some Broadway shows. He was educated as a musician, I think, in Warsaw. So he was a classically trained, legitimate sort of Middle European post-romantic composer. And you can really hear it in the original version of the song, because it sounds like Rachmaninoff, right? So a lot of my comments about the composition are going to be kind of coming from that point of view, not necessarily the kind of jazzy sort of chord scale theory or even necessarily the Barry Harris sort of point of view, but more the kind of, you know, a little bit the formal composition thing. So let's talk about form and the tonality of the melody. So the form is basically, it's A, B, C, A, sort of. The first A is basically different from the last A, both in the chords and the melody, but those two bits kind of share this same melodic line at the beginning, which is okay, and then they change, right? So they both have that. So it kind of feels like a recapitulation of the, you know, A section, but you kind of, obviously it changes and it moves somewhere else. So you can't really say that, you know, in the jazz sense, that's two A sections like you can for like rhythm changes or something, you know. And so that's very weird. So essentially, as far as we're concerned, the tune is through composed, which is unusual. There's not many tunes in the jazz standards repertoire which are through composed in that way. Most of them are AABA, ABAC, of course, and there's a few little funny ones like AAB, which is Softly as in the Morning Sunrise, and a few other ones like that. But most of them have more repeated material than this. So what can we see about it? Well, first of all, a really big thing is that the tune is actually very diatonic to B flat. There's an E natural, I think in bar 10, if I remember correctly, which kind of points us towards the direction of D minor and F. There's a modulation in those bars until it goes down into the bridge. And there's also a fruity G flat at the end. Now the G flat note is kind of coming from the parallel minor mode, and it's really common actually, you know, really common in the music of that era. Another example would be Embraceable You by George Gershwin. Just at the end it slips into minor, but that kind of gives you like a beautiful sort of, a little kind of interesting variation to the B flat tonality. But even though the harmony is very rich and chromatic, the melody stays more or less in B flat most of the time. And that's what we would, I suppose, expect from a standard song, because the fundamental thing about standard song is that it's singable. It's not, you know, a bunch of notes over chords. It's a melody. And melodies that are singable in Western culture, but probably elsewhere as well, kind of are within a certain scale or modality. And that's no different for standard songs. They were first and foremost pop songs. Obviously, some tunes have like key changes. For instance, Just the Way You Look Tonight goes from, I think, in the original key F to A flat. But, you know, that's a very strong key change. But, the fact that there's chromatic chords going on in the harmony in the A section is neither here nor there, because the melody is very much in F, for instance, just as an example. So this is something that's general remark about standards. It's something you tend to find a lot. Right, with all of that said, we've got an interesting motive for the way the melody relates to the chords, which is that Stella is just full of these things called, I think they're called Appoggiaturas in classical terminology. What does that mean in plain English? Well, that is, I mean, that's Italian, right? Appoggiatura. It's a leaning note. So you have a dissonance, and you actually accent the dissonance. It's not like a passing tone or a lower labour. You actually accent the dissonance and then resolve it. In this case, in Stella, it's always downwards by a scale step. So, for instance, if I play the first bit, yada, that's a dissonant note, the A, against the original first chord, which is B flat diminished. We'll talk about that in a second. But eventually it resolves down to G, which is a note within that chord. Okay, so jazzers looking at that will be tempted to go, oh, it's upper extension, or it's this half-whole chord, what, you know, whatever. But actually, in the original, it's just like borrowing a note from B flat major that's dissonant against the chord and leaning into it and then resolving it. And Stella is full of these aching dissonances, which is probably one of the reasons why jazz musicians were attracted to it in the first place. It's really beautiful. A similar effect is, if you know Mahler's Adagietto for strings from the Fifth Symphony, I think the first chord, if I remember correctly, is an F major, but the melody note starts on E. Now we would call that, of course, an F major 7th chord, but Mahler, I think, was just thinking of that as being a just like an aching dissonance. So even though jazz musicians wouldn't hear that as a dissonance, I think Mahler did, okay, for instance. And I think this is also the case with Victor Young and his composition of Stella by Starlight. Now what's happened is very interesting, because jazz musicians have taken those aching dissonances and turned them into chord scale relationships and things like that. So, with that in mind, we have to talk about
the first chord.
So, the first chord of Stella by Starlight is one of those areas where people like to go,
well, actually, I think you'll find.
And there's nothing wrong with being educated about the history of the tune. Two of my favourite jazz educators and musicians, Barry Harris and Peter Bernstein, both bring up this point, and I think it's important to know. But it doesn't mean that you go to a jam session and insist everybody plays the first chord of Stella by Starlight correctly. It's just good to know that the original chord was in fact a B flat diminished 7th. And the melody note that sits on it for a while is one of these leaning notes, one of these long dissonances, and that's an A. So it goes, yeah, yeah. Isn't that beautiful? Gorgeous. I mean, most people play E minor 7 flat 5 A7 there. And that's fine. You know, the first chord would actually be that, because you've got the 11th on top of the minor 7 flat 5 chord. Interestingly, people never actually put the 11th in there if they do that. They always just call it an E half diminished chord or minor 7 flat 5 still. Funny thing, that. Anyway, we have the A, which is just, you know, obviously not part of that chord. But it's part of the A7, obviously, because it's an A, right? And I think that's something lost. You know, the character of that chord is really beautiful. Oh. Okay, so I mean, it doesn't matter what you do. I mean, the majority of like jazz versions I've checked out use the 2/5, the E minor 7 flat 5 A7 version. That includes like Jim Hall, Stan Getz, Bill Evans, Miles Davis, Ella Fitzgerald. So I'm not really talking about schmoes here. You know, I'm talking about people who could actually play. You know, and they saw fit to go E minor 7 flat 5 A7. And of course, Jim Hall was actually teacher to Peter Bernstein, lest we forget. But I'm certain that all of those musicians would have known the original progression was a B flat diminished. And where that can help us is actually because this thing here is like a jump. So going from E minor 7 flat 5 A7 and then jumping up to C minor 7 F7 is the sort of thing that people go, oh, it's a non-functional set. It's non-functional 2/5s, which means absolutely nothing. Non-functional 2/5s. Oh, I don't know what it is, so I'll just call it a fancy name. In fact, what this relates to is if we take the B flat diminished 7th and ignore that upper appoggiatura of the A and take it up a minor 3rd, we get D flat diminished 7th, right? Because obviously you can do that with diminished chords, yeah? You can put them up in minor 3rds and all the notes stay the same, just in a different order, to quote the great musicologists of our time, Morecambe and Wise. We go to D flat diminished 7th and then go to C minor 7 F7. So that is not weird, because like there's loads of chord progressions in jazz that go flat 3 diminished 2 5 and then 1, or that doesn't go to 1 in this case. And that is just like standard stuff. I mean, they don't always teach it, but it is. I mean, if you learn any number of old standards, you'll see this progression again and again. And there's various ways of substituting it, but it's an old school progression for the 1930s and 40s, I would say, really. Barry Harris has got a whole rant about how nobody plays flat 3 anymore. It's also a very parsimonious, if you like, way to join a B flat 6 chord to a C minor 7 or a E flat 6 chord. You basically just got these two lines, and you also get a count basie introduction in, you know. So that's a whole other video, but it's worth bearing that in mind. So that makes this a bit less weird. So so this is a suspension, right? We got the root there of the F7 chord, but we just anticipate it in the C minor. So, you know, you call it a C minor 11th if you want, but I think the 2/5, as far as I can hear, is in the original score. And I do that because it's a passing tone, and I haven't, you know, basically I haven't got anything better to do in my time. And then we go to F minor 9, B flat 13, and we get the lovely B flat from E flat major down to A flat 9. This isn't what the original is, right? It stays on the E flat major. Might go E flat minor just at the end, but most jazzers now play A flat 7 there. Okay, right, so here's the thing. These chord progressions are all very straightforward. 2/5 and then 2/5 going into E flat, which is the 4 chord. So we're kind of just going, you know, 5, 1, 4, using a 1/7, and then minor plagal. That's basically what we're doing there, okay? Nothing fancy. The melody is nice because it goes from that C on the 9th. That's really pretty, right? It goes to the 9th and 13th of those chords and then resolves to a nice obvious E flat chord tone before we do that jazz backdoor chord, the A flat 7. Right, okay, moving on. So then we get more of these yearning Appoggiaturas. That. Now the 4th. Where's me out? I always think of Fake Plastic Trees by Radiohead, right? Okay, so that is a 4th, grating against that B flat chord. It's the most dissonant note in the B flat major scale. It's called, Mark Levine calls it an avoid note in his jazz theory book. And that note is like, no, the grit that makes the pearl. Because then the resolution, perhaps not the way I'm singing it, but the resolution to the 3rd is absolutely beautiful, right? And then the same thing happens on the minor, which is a bit softer. It's not as dissonant on minor. I mean, you often play D minor 11th chords, but it's rare, except perhaps in very contemporary music, that we would play a B flat and 11th, you know? So, and I like a minor major or a minor 6th there. And then another difference, that's the word I'm looking for, between the original changes and the most common jazz changes is that isn't a 2/5. We don't go E half diminished A7 D minor in the original. What we do is we go just a straight G minor 6, which is the same chord as E half diminished. Different bass note. And then we don't bother with the dominant, we just go straight to the D minor. And then, again, in variance to the real book, there's this really nice little walk down that happens. B flat minor 6/D, F/C, B flat major. Sorry, B flat diminished 7th, beg your pardon. A minor, 7, and then D7, and then we're into the bridge, right? That's really nice, so I think. So you can modernise those chords a little bit if you want. Okay, so again, you know, oh, sorry, I forgot to mention we have that 4th motif again on the F. So we got that in 3 different keys. B flat major, a little bit simpler in D minor, and then again in F major. And then the same motif again that we had over the D minor. Sorry, he says, playing it wrong. thing but transposed up a fifth. I think like jazz musicians often miss stuff like that. If you're soloing, that's a good motif to hang on to. The harmonic function of those notes change though because we're playing over a you know A minor 7 D7, A minor 7 flat 5 D7 chord. Okay, so it changes slightly. Okay, we're no longer dealing with that yearning appoggiatura. So the chords are kind of dissonant anyway. Okay, and then again it's an appoggiatura. It's a leaning dissonance. We get that sharp 5, the E flat. Well, flat 13, I guess, is probably a more accurate way of putting it. But I always think of these things as the sharp 5s, and it makes me think of the whole tone scale for some reason. Okay, that's another. You know, you can play the whole tone scale there. Lots of people do that. But it resolves to the 5 before moving to the C. And again, it's a 4th, just like we had before, but this time on a C minor chord. And it eventually resolves to the E flat, and then we get this beautiful chord here, which I like to play. Let me just play the whole thing through, sorry, I know it. I like E flat minor major 7th there. Most people play, I think, A flat 7 sharp 11th. That's a nice chord, but I kind of feel this has got, I don't know, it's along with this one. And it's the same shape as well, so you get 2 beautiful chords for the price of 1. Come on! We're winning. Right, it's beautiful. Okay, so what's going on harmonically there is we're moving from that 6th chord to the 2. So we're doing a bit of major minor modal interchange. There's a word for you. So we're taking that colour that you'd have for the 2 chord in B flat. So we've just gone 6-2. C minor is 2 chord in B flat major. And we're interchanging it with notes from the minor key. So we turn that G there into a G flat. Remember I talked about the G flat earlier? And that's enough to give it that kind of dark colour, which is really nice. Or you can look at it as moving the whole thing up a minor 3rd and getting an E flat minor 6th, which is basically the same thing, apart from a bass note, as A flat 9, right? It's important to remember these relationships. That relationship will get you a long way in jazz, in harmony in general, actually. Like post-romantic composers use those relationships. So I'm not going to talk about Tristan and Isolde right now. Okay, so this is, beautiful, right? So that is, that relationship is kind of an important one to know, and you get it a lot, both for playing 2-5-1s, but also in the bridges of tunes, like Sweet Sue is an example, an old swing tune. Avalon have changes like that. Sweet Sue's probably a better example. So the problem is, like with that note, is that that note again is like a leaning dissonance. It's a D. Oh, that's nice. That becomes a low cruel natural 2 chord or a low cruel natural sharp 2 chord. So we're getting delving slightly. Even the jazz brain would think, oh, we're delving into the melodic minor modes there, perhaps. And of course that's Lydian dominant, and that's melodic minor, low cruel natural 2. I'm fairly sure that's not what the guy writing it thought of though. And it resolves and it gets us a 9th on the B flat. So we've gone 6-2, 4 minor maybe, 1. Fairly straightforward chord progression. It's the same as, you get 6-2-5-1, but instead of the 5 we have a minor plagal, which is always a nice substitution to make. I think somebody's just popped a video up about that. I'll just link below. So yeah, that. And it does resolve, and then it goes to the A, and then again we can use that chord again if we want, the B flat diminished with the A on top, and then 2-5, D minor 7 flat 5, G7 flat 9, not that unusual, or flat 13 I'm playing here, not that unusual for the B flat major key, but then we have a modal interchange again we're using the half diminished chord, and see how the melody fits over that? Sorry. Some nice voicings there. Yeah, just take your... Move that finger and you go from a nice B flat major with a major... B flat diminished with a major 7th on top to a nice modern voicing for B flat major 7th. It's actually B flat... I think B flat add 9. Yeah. Major 7th on top. So that's a nice voicing. I like it when shapes are the same, but I'm a simple man. So most people play that as a set of descending 2/5s, minor 2/5s. Okay, which is tricky, good to practice. Of course, Stella is normally played quite slowly, but if you look at Woody and You by, I think it's Dizzy Gillespie, a tune that was favoured by both Ahmad Jamal and Miles Davis. Miles Davis probably took the idea of playing it from Ahmad Jamal, like he did a lot of his ideas actually. You'll find that it has the same A section, same chords. Also, a tune by a band I'm in, the Hot Club of Jupiter, has a tune called The Hot Club of Jupiter, which has a very similar A section again. Just that instead of that chord, we play a flat 6 going that way, which is always a good substitute. So you could play, except your melody note's wrong. You could go, and then you could go. You could do that, or okay. Do that instead. I don't know. What I'm doing there is just like going chromatically down in chords instead of playing the 2/5s, which is always fun. So we do that. And then that different way of doing it is a little bit influenced by Ronnie Ben Hur, who says, under the influence of Barry Harris, although I haven't first-hand heard Barry talking about this, when you see a flat 6 chord, or this movement, for instance, in B flat, you can always play a minor 2/5 instead. So those two things are kind of the same, and actually if you make the melodies line up, it sounds quite good. The first chord has to be major 7th though. B flat major 7th. Sub at the end. Okay. Oh yeah. One last thing. This tune is a great exercise. I mean, obviously the first chord with this A in the top. I think a lot of jazz musicians would be keen to explore the the sort of sounds of the half whole scale. So, I mean, that's a nice thing to do. Also, in terms of soloing, it doesn't really matter too much if somebody plays a B flat diminished 7th there, as long as you play... I wouldn't play the flat 5 there on the A7 chord. I'd use my sort of go-to sort of dominant flat 9 scale, which is actually a mixture of the Phrygian dominant, which is this. Case it doesn't actually go to D minor, but that's how it normally goes, which is the same notes as you would get from using the Barry Harris way of outlining a minor 2/5, which I'm not going to talk about here. And you can use Jens Larsen's thing of he mentioned in a video recently. You can use a that's a A7 sus4 flat 9. Sorry, it's actually, beg your pardon. It's just an A flat 9 sus4 chord. Nice, isn't it? So that's the sound that you can use as well. There's literally endless things you can say about this tune. It's a favourite for a reason. It's a fantastic composition, beautiful song, and endless vehicle for jazz. So. Post any comments below. I'm sure I've missed some stuff out. You probably know some tricks and hacks that I didn't really have time to cover, and this video is already almost 25 minutes long, and I'm going to stop it now.